President Joe Biden making campaign stops in several battleground states this week. He will visit Michigan on Thursday, where he's faced some backlash from some progressives over his response to Israel's war with Hamas. Michigan's Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens joins us now, one of them in the delegation. Congresswoman, thanks for being here. We really appreciate your time.
Nice to see you.
It seems like President Biden just keeps going back to Michigan, to your state. Let's talk about the economy first. He has made a real effort to build ties with labor in Michigan. Is it working? Is he being effective in making sure those voters who many times over the years have gone Democratic are staying there?
I really believe in the strategy that President Biden is employing. And we joke in Michigan that he might as well just get a condo in Detroit because he's with us so much and has been very consistently over his entire presidency. From the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, Michigan was his first stop after we passed that. Certainly championing chips and science, key legislation for Michigan. But what he's doing is working, connecting with voters one-on-one. You just don't come in and do big rallies. You see President Biden making stops at diners, going to picket lines, really bringing people in, trying to learn what's on their minds and what issues are facing them, and also giving voters a chance to really get to know the real Joe Biden. And I love it. Our state likes it. And I think it's going to pay dividends come Election Day.
Are you sounding the alarm to White House officials and Biden campaign officials about the support of Arab Americans and others in Michigan who have concerns about the Biden administration's handling of Israel, especially its war with Hamas and Prime Minister Netanyahu? And if you are having those kind of conversations, what are you saying behind the scenes about what needs to be done, if anything?
What I'm saying and how we can look at all of this is that this is a moment for Joe Biden to really succeed as himself and how he chooses to lead, with grace, with dignity, with care and compassion, with listening first. This isn't a rejection campaign from his side at all. People are upset, they're frustrated, they're in deep, deep pain. And Joe Biden cares about these people as people, not just as voters. What's happened in the Middle East is very tragic. You heard him talk very clearly at the State of the Union that he has been a long-standing elected official with the U.S.-Israel relationship and in support of that, but that he also wants to make sure that aid is getting to innocent Palestinians, that we're still pushing for a two-state solution. I thought he gave a great one-on-one interview the other night as well about the complexities of this situation. And this is where the trajectory of Joe Biden's career, steady, consistent, leaderly, shows the stark contrast with a twice impeached, multiple indicted former president that is yet again running for re-election.
You mentioned Trump's legal challenges, his impeachment. You're a member of Congress. You speak to voters all the time. Do you believe that undecided voters, swing voters in Michigan, care about Trump's upcoming criminal hush money payments trial or his potential federal trials looming on the horizon? Are they paying attention? Are they engaged on those issues at all?
I think there are a handful of voters who are concerned, and you've seen this play out throughout the Republican primary process. Certainly, Mr. Trump has been winning Republican primaries handedly. He's now the only person running. His last competitor still hasn't endorsed him. But what you saw, and particularly in a state like Michigan, where Nikki Haley amassed 300,000 votes without even really campaigning there, doing very well in a district like mine. Joe Biden still will win my district and is doing very well in my district, but I represent the suburbs of Detroit. And Donald Trump is not going to be able to come back in and win back these suburban voters. You even see traditional Republican voters, some who are scratching their head and saying the indictments, the prosecution, the way these court cases play out, obviously now bankruptcy, that might push them. But look, that's not the campaign that we really need to focus on. That's in the courts and that will play out. We have to look at record. Joe Biden has delivered for American workers. Joe Biden has delivered for Michigan's economy. I'm enthusiastic about this campaign because, frankly, I think it's going to be so much fun to run on the track record of success and then still push forward the campaign of the future, the things that we want to get done, like banning assault weapons, like working on critical minerals, continuing to bolster our supply chain and our manufacturing base, which is how people earn their living in Michigan.
And finally here, Congresswoman, I've been speaking to some of your fellow House members, House Democrats behind the scenes, and frankly, some of them, they breathed a sigh of relief after the State of the Union because they wanted President Biden to push back against his critics, people who don't think he's as vital as he once was because of his age, and they believed he had an effective night with the State of the Union. Is that your sense of things, that Democrats now, a few days later, feel a little bit more emboldened, encouraged by what happened at the State of the Union, that the president has a bounce in his step? And if so, how do they want him to sustain that? What does that look like? Because in politics, as you know, it's hard to keep up momentum at times as things are fleeting.
Well, we've got a booming economy. People are back to work. We've got a president who's a love leader. And truthfully, I know people get nervous and there's all that going on, but I was fired up for the State of the Union, and my president hit a home run, as I knew he would. I worked on the U.S. auto rescue in President Obama's administration. Joe Biden, as vice president, stood up at the DNC, and what was his famous quote? "Osama bin Laden is dead, and GM and Chrysler are alive." He knows how to pack a punch. He knows how to communicate, capturing moments where lots of people are listening, which he certainly did and delivered on, and made his message clear, not only painting the contrast, but also showing that he's going to stand up for women's rights. He's got a women's health office. That's certainly going to play very well in the suburban district. So let's continue to let Joe Biden be Joe Biden and deliver every step of the way. He's headed toward a good November, in my opinion.
And we hope Congresswoman Haley Stevens comes back soon. And President Biden, of course, welcome anytime here. Thank you very much, Congresswoman. We appreciate it.